Hey everybody, this is Brent from The Second Look, and this evening I have the pleasure of speaking to Julia Prescott. Julia, hello.
Hi, I'm here.
You're here. Um, yeah, so far you're the first person that I actually know before doing the
Oh
interview.
yeah, yeah.
So
That's so
we,
fun.
I know some things, but I'm curious to know other things like that don't just come up in kind of casual conversation. Um, but yeah, we want to start at the beginning. Like, what do you think? What was the moment that set you on this path to get you where you are today?
Yeah. Well, a couple different things. It's so I'm in my birthday month right now, and so I'm like feeling a lot of astrology things that are kind of confirming personality traits that have always been there. So I'm an Aries, which by all, and I'm not an astrology girly, but like by all of my readings of that, it's we are very type A motivated, get the fuck out of my way, like I'm about to tear through this earth. And that is my the reason why I'm even saying this is because I feel like that is sort of my earliest memory of like what set me on this path. I always joke that like I came out of the womb with a pen in hand. I just always wanted to be a writer, partly probably because I grew up in Los Angeles. My parents came here to make it, and my quick joke is that they didn't, so I'm not a Nepo baby. But my second joke is that I always say that I'm a second generation Hollywood dream chaser. Yeah, my parents got divorced when I was 4, which is why I'm a comedian. And my mom raised me. And it was just my mom, my sister, and I growing up in North Hollywood. And, you know, you just, when you grow up around the industry, you see your neighbors go out for pilot season, or you have your best friend's dad be a producer on a TV show or whatever. You get very clued into like what an actual creative career in this industry looks like very early. So I think it's kind of impossible for me to like, you know, put them apart from each other. Everything felt consistent of like, I was a big reader and just always knew I wanted to write in some capacity, but probably if I grew up anywhere else, I would deign myself to be a novelist, you know, a little bit longer than I immediately realized that I was probably going to write comedy. And also my dad was a stand-up comedian in the 80s and 90s. So he quit before I was born. And in fact, he's actually started doing stand up again. He just started last year and it's been like the coolest thing and he's so happy. But anyway, I grew up in that kind of like household where that all of that was really normal. Just like my parents' famous friends were really normal and things
Yeah.
like that. So yeah, I just always had an awareness of it. And like my teenage rebellion, I guess, was exploring any other path that wasn't that just for kicks. But I always knew like deep down that writing was going to be what I was going to do. Yeah, I always like loved to just doodle in my notebook like short stories and very early I felt the presence of an audience and the goal of an audience very early. So middle school or elementary school, whatever, you have assignments in English class to like use the vocabulary words in like sentences or in short stories. And I just have a very vivid memory, specifically in middle school, where I, this is actually a really Hollywood story. I'll just jump into it. There was a girl in our class named Jade who was absent for like a whole week. And, you know, again, I grew up in the Valley, so it was very typical for kids to be called out of class to like go audition and whatever. But a full week was like really alarming.
Yeah.
And we were all in sixth grade. And I remember having this thought of like, this week for the vocabulary words, I'm going to write like a short story mystery of like where Jade is. And it was this like really great lesson of also like playing to your audience. Like everybody in my class was like, this is about us, you know, and like getting engaged in that way. And then she was gone for, I want to say for like 3 weeks. And so it became this like 3-parter. And I had this audience that I was shooting for and I had them captivated and it was intoxicating. It was really the first time that I felt that rush of what would later become a stand-up audience for me or what would later become you
Uh-huh.
know, an audience of people. I did Channel 101 after college, so an audience of people in the theater watching my shorts. Like that was the first taste of what that was for me. And then when Jade finally came back to class, this is where it gets super Hollywood because I forget what I wrote, but it was like very pulpy mystery,
Yeah.
murder, whatever. And then when she showed back up, everyone was like, holy shit, what happened to you, Jade? And she was like, oh yeah, I got cast in a girl group and we've just been opening for Aaron Carter on tour. And everyone was like, what?
Wow.
just normal shit, you know. But anyway, so that was sort of the first instance, and yeah, I guess even in that was just like I was writing prose, but even my prose was always very like TV structured. So yeah, hopefully that answers.
Yeah, that's great. A couple things. One is like the what you described of being in class and being able to present your work and get a reaction, very similar to what a stand-up would feel like being on stage for the first time, which is something writers don't usually get. They don't get that immediate feedback from a group.
No. Yeah.
That's pretty special. I can only imagine what that did for you. Affirmation and motivation.
Yeah. And I would later do stand up. When we first met, when I was a college student,
Mhm.
I started doing stand up, and then I did that for around a decade. And, you know, writing for me was always number one, but that to me felt like an extension of getting that instant validation for a creative work. And it was funny, like when I met my husband, we were first just dating, he's an artist animator person. He's an animation director, his official title, but he's an artist person. And I remember talking to some of our mutual friends, and I think that they were like more comedy people that I knew known before. And they made the observation of like, you need the instant validation, and he's satisfied with a delayed validation for
Mm,
his creative output.
mm,
And that's very interesting. And I didn't think about it like that.
mm.
And what does that say about my own neediness? But for me, it was really like, sure, attention feels great, but it was like either a yes or a no. Like that joke is going to work, go with it, or don't kill it. And yeah, you're right. Like that's something that writers don't particularly get. And especially when, like development hell will delay your work getting out for so much longer. And then it requires another several miracles to get your work out there at all.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to learn to be satisfied without that validation, or you need to learn how to get it in other ways if you're just a writer. So like, table reads, stage readings, writers groups, things like that. It's balancing both those sides.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking like there's not many professions in the industry that get that. Everybody, actors, maybe the actors are on set and they can get a feel for it right then. Maybe I spoke too soon, but anybody making a project, it's taking weeks and months, and for it to really land, and by then you're so mired in it, you have no objectivity left, and so you have to wait for it. And that's, yeah, I think it's a good personality trait that we're circling here, that you should probably have or cultivate to make sure that you can handle that, because sometimes you're going to wait months to get it or not at all.
Yeah. And it's a time thing too, with time and experience. I remember working with another writer on a project, and they phrased it like all writing, especially comedy writing, but all writing is just establishing and strengthening muscle memory.
Mm,
That's all it is.
mm,
And when you're just starting out, you've absolutely no muscle memory and you're fully panicked. And it's that like perfect Ira Glass quote that every writer quotes, which is like, that quote about how when you first start out wanting to, pursue a creative, sorry, my cat is going to walk into frame right now. When you're first like wanting to pursue a creative career, your taste is really sharp, but your ability is really weak. And so it can be really frustrating, and a lot of people quit, but then at one point it's going to like, converge, and you're going to be able to express yourself in the way that your taste matches. But
mm.
when you're first starting out, you don't know what you don't know. So you're just kind of like, oh, okay. And then it's like embarrassing to like admit to the world that you're an artist. It just feels, there's, I think, like a bourgeois kind of stigmatization of like a frivolousness that, can kind of like bring into the room. And then also the imposter syndrome of like, why do I deserve even the ability to express myself in this way? And a lot of your work fucking sucks. And so you're like,
Yeah,
for better or worse, nobody is seeing it. But if nobody is seeing it, then you're not strengthening your muscle memory. So I think if I were to, you didn't ask me this question, but I'm going to answer it. Like if I were to give advice to people that are wanting to be a writer, at any stage of life, be they young, be they old, be it a second career, It's to get really comfortable in the uncomfortable and get really comfortable with embarrassment. And
Mm,
I think that embarrassment is like one of our greatest assets as a culture and a society. I read somewhere a statistic of like embarrassing dads like raise the best kids, dads that make dad jokes,
yeah,
because they're like, protecting them and strengthening them for the world in ways that, intentionally you don't get. But if you are, comfortable in that on that discomfort, and you don't hold all of your emotions at the surface, and not every word that you write is imbued or entwined with your self-worth, I think the more comfortable you get in just being like, this fucking sucks, tell me how bad it sucks,
yeah.
then that's the only way that I think that you can actually have that kind of growth.
Mm, that's great. Yeah, yep. This is yeah, there's so much to your disposition that is required to be a functional member or
Yeah.
of this profession that yeah, it's hard to teach. It's
Yeah.
you just gotta
You just got to go to therapy. You got to get really armed up. I feel like I have a fucking cabal of people on my insurance that like, they're my angels in flight carrying
yeah,
me. I've got what a therapist, a psychiatrist, this, that, this, like a really nice chiropractor that counts for something.
yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah, it's just about getting all of that together, and yeah, like, I think learning also how to take rejection too, which, there's the obvious lesson in that, right, of bouncing back, but something that, like, has struck me particularly recently is, rejection is one thing. You get to feel that emotion in the moment, and you process it in the way that you process it, and of course, you need to be good at that. But I also think that people don't talk enough about the desert of nothingness,
Mm,
and like the endurance required when nothing, like you would almost beg for rejection because that means somebody's engaging with you.
yeah,
But to endure like that desert of nothingness when no phone calls are coming in, which, we are at a historic time right now, and I'm sick of the historic times, but we are at a historic time where, there's really not a lot of work, particularly on the writing side for film and television. And so a lot of people that were like cooking for decades are feeling the desert of nothingness. So what do you do? And, there's a lot of different survival paths, but I think most importantly, you just got to keep your mind strong,
mm,
and like, remind yourself why you do this.
yeah, right. Because well, that's what you can control when you're dealing with a huge machine that you have no control over.
And nobody, not even the people pressing the buttons on the machine
Yeah,
at this current moment in time,
yeah,
they're
right.
scared that they're not going to be able to press that button on that machine tomorrow. So it's like everyone is terrified, which is comforting in its equalizing nature,
Mm,
but it is out of your control. It is just what it is. And I think when you find yourself in those moments, yeah, it's like reminding yourself in however way you can where that initial spark was and who you were. So I mentioned in middle school, it's reminding myself the 13-year-old I was and how much I sparked to writing, and going, how do we maintain this every day?
yeah,
Sometimes we can't.
right.
Sometimes it's really hard. But in other days, it looks like reading a book that can be inspiring to me, or watching a movie, that can be inspiring, or just stepping outside of my house and changing my environment and meeting up with friends and, like bitching for an hour, but like, or making each other laugh. Actually, that's better.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that's the way that you can kind of remind yourself that you're still a person through this.
Yes, that's great. You mentioned your parents as the first generation dream chasers. How did they and you said, like, they didn't quite get there, but
Yeah.
how did they impart, some knowledge there, some experience that you could glean from?
Yeah. Interestingly, mom and my dad kind of had different approaches to it, where and I don't know a ton about when they were together, as you can imagine. It's not a lot of sunny memories and things like that. But we grew up like hearing stories of how their life was and blah 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 blah. But I think that that's important to know because they I would say like there was the magnetism that brought them here. And I do think that they found a community, as I mentioned, like, they have friends that have gone on to be very famous. And so they did find a community that was like really vibrant. And I do believe that they experienced like what that dream of Hollywood is. And then, life happens and some people get famous, some people don't. And they didn't get famous and they kind of had to pivot to survival jobs. And they taught me way more in their example than they really did with saying, like, verbally, this is what you should do. But I should say that at no point did either of my parents discourage my sister or I to enter the industry. There is a sense of like, what else are you going to do? Especially when you like grow up going to like every school I went to growing up was a performing arts school. So like really, really what are you gonna do? But they would have been open and like accepting if we decided to be HR professionals or whatever.
Mm.
But it was a weird balance of encouragement and also like protecting the rejection and all of that. My mom is a religious woman, and so every time my sister, she's a background artist in animation. So, she's in the industry in that corner. But every time we get passed up for a job, my mom's like, I pray every day that you'll get it. And I'm like, and I should also say not to like drag my mom, but like, it's a slippery slope when you yourself came to Hollywood with starry eyes. And, I'd be lying if I said that there weren't certain times where my own success felt like my mom was living vicarious and putting pressures on me. Like, I remember I got my very first writing job within 6 months of graduating college, which just doesn't happen. And I was a staff writer on a Warner Brothers show, and it was stupid. I think about that 22-year-old all the time, and I judge the adults who hired her. Anyway, but when that happened, my mom very quickly just painted this whole picture of how my life is going to be like from that moment forward. And I didn't know anything different. So I listened, right? And that set me up. It ended up not being as glowy as, and she didn't know, right? But like, yeah, I wasn't like executive producing Two and a Half Men within years. Like I went the path that a lot of other writers do, which is feast or famine. But it set me up for this like early quarter life crisis, and it set me up for a lot of like, yeah, that the emotional hardship of when your self-worth is intertwined with what you do, and when your self-worth is intertwined with an industry that is so fucking random. And I feel like a lot of the lessons I gained in retrospect, because I went through that turbulent time of like thinking I was going to be the next great everything because I was being told that, and I had no reason to not believe that. Then to like have this embarrassing experience of being a staff writer on a show one day, and then like the next day I was working as a travel assistant on the Ellen Show, which is a completely different podcast. But I was so embarrassed because I felt like I had downgraded and I thought people were going to judge me. Nobody cared. Now people do for another reason. But anyway, yeah, it was just like a lot of lessons that I had to learn myself. And it was interesting too, like going back to my parents, I felt like they were growing with me as well and seeing it through the way it was experiencing through me and through my sister. So it led to like a really interesting upbringing of like having parents who got what you were doing, but were still parents. Like my mom calling me up when I was 29 working some job, and she was like, you should be 30 under 30. You should call up Forbes. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm at DreamWorks. I'm a nobody right now. But shit like that would happen, right? And I don't know, it was interesting. It was interesting. Yeah, I feel like now looking back on like all of the ups and downs, like I don't regret any of it. And I also innately knew from an early age that it was so random, right? Because like, yeah, my parents, I believe they're both talented, and then things just didn't work out. They had so many friends that were so freaking talented, just didn't work out. And then I went into doing stand up when I from college into my early adulthood, And there were so many people that were lifers, and you were like, I see it all the time, you know. So I don't know. There was a lot of things going around that I was soaking in like a sponge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like going back to my parents, the one thing that I feel like I had to learn, it wasn't so much like my own rejection and my own letdown. That conversation letting them down again of like, I got rejected, mom. Please don't immediately do the sign of the cross. Like, it's going to be okay. I feel like I'm talking them down more,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I think is maybe just what you do when you grow up too.
Sure. Well, I just think um, it's great that despite their, despite the fact that they didn't make it and that they were still supportive for you, you can imagine parents who were bitter and
Right. Yeah.
maybe to a fault, to overprotective and kind of steering you away from it, even though you were just seems like naturally disposed
Yeah. Yeah.
in that direction.
And I almost wonder if like they got further down on that journey. So like, for example, there's a family legend of, I should say, all right, I'll back up. You know how every actor has like an acting nemesis, like an audition nemesis, where like you're the same exact type of person. My friend, it's very funny. His audition nemesis is Paul Walter Hauser. He's like, that fucking guy, I hate him, you know? Anyway, so my dad's audition nemesis was Dave Coulier,
Okay.
and he didn't get Full House, right? But it was down to the two of them, as the story goes. Who knows? Somebody's going to fact check this and be like, no, it was somebody else. Well, whatever. That was the story that I was told. And, my joke when I heard that was like, oh my God, I came so close to being so shitty. I could have been a real bitch and I would have been rich, but man, I would have been awful. But he didn't get that. So I feel like there's a version of my upbringing where, yeah, my dad got that. And not to say like anything about Dave Coulier in his career afterward, but like say my dad did get Full House and then he got nothing ever again, or he got typecast into something. And then it became this golden handcuff situation.
Yeah.
I can see a world in which he warns my sister and I to never touch the industry. So
Yeah.
I think that there's also something to be said about them getting close enough to understand, but still enthusiastic enough to go like I'm on the like uphill on the roller coaster, and we've yet to reach like that peak when we fly down. And so maybe there was a little bit of that. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. So even with success, it could have come at a cost for them and for
Right.
you. That's
I
interesting.
see it all the time. We
Yeah.
see it all the time. We
Yeah.
have so many friends that like, yeah, it just becomes this burden.
Mm.
And you go, okay, because yeah, that you have no control over that either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Okay, so after college, you got your first gig. It might have changed, I'm sure, a bit since then, but like, what was the process and would it apply today?
No, it wasn't.
Mhm.
But I mean, but I should also say that like no process is like copy and
Right.
paste to anybody else, right? So what I would say that I still think is like strong advice. What helped me get that job is, so I got very lucky when I graduated high school. I went to an arts high school again. Everything was performing arts.
Mhm.
And I went to an arts high school where it was the first year that Warner Brothers had paired up with this arts high school because I went to Loxa. If anyone knows it, it's like kind of like a fame high school,
Mhm.
LA County High School for the Arts. And so, we had a lot of eyeballs on us, and Warner Brothers came to it wasn't even a film department, it was a program. So I was in this program and they were like wanting to do a scholarship for someone to go to film school. And then I very luckily won that scholarship. So I was the first person from that school to do that. And then part of that was this amazing opportunity that I still can't believe happened. I got to intern, a paid internship at Warner Brothers every summer. So yeah, and I just found out they discontinued that particular internship program. So stupid. I hate it all. Anyway, because of that, being on the Warner Brothers lot every summer and bouncing around to different, departments, and they would call me up every spring going, what are you interested in? And then they would try to slot me. So I would say like it was one part that and me getting this job, but then also, when I was in college, I was starting to do stand up and, thinking I want to write TV comedy. like what's the saying? I'm gonna butcher it, but it's like, luck is preparation plus time or something. I don't know. Or
Yeah.
there's something to that.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared. So I just started knowing that I needed to have a writing packet. And I also had the I don't know, the knowledge, the wisdom, I don't know where it came from, to be like, everything I write immediately is going to suck. So I'm going to have to start as early as possible to get all this suck.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I remember being like a sophomore and being like, I'm just going to start writing spec scripts and then like see how that goes. So I just kept writing and writing and writing, and then started doing started writing sketches, figured out how to do that, or not figured it, but like I just started to like get my sea legs with it. And so then by the time I was finishing up my internships, I had this meeting with the guy who ran at the time the Warner Brothers Writing Workshop, which is an incredible fellowship that I think, yeah, they still have. A lot of the studios have this fellowship for helping writers get a foot in the door, and they like position them. They'll do the fellowship for like 6 months or 2 year. Sometimes it's paid, and they're basically like, it's like a boot camp for aspiring writers to like become TV writers, and then they like place them on TV shows. So anyway, I have this meeting with this guy. I'm like about to graduate college, and I think like, oh my God, he's the one that he has the keys to like change my career. So I think I've got such swag walking into this office, thinking that like, I'm walking in this office today, tomorrow I'm on 2.5 Men or whatever. I
Right.
just like was so confident. And I will never forget, I walked into his office, and before I even sat on like his little mini couch, he goes like, "Hey, nice to meet you. Just so you know, you're way too young for me to even consider you for the writing workshop." And I just remember, like, when you're in the playground as a kid and you get winded, like I just felt like it was just fully, but something else came over me, and thank God it did. Something else came over me where I was like, that's fine. We're just hanging out. And there was something so great, and maybe this is also part of the advice, but there was something so great about like there not being any pressure to the meeting anymore. So I was able to actually relax. And what ended up happening in that meeting was, and it was because I had prepared a writing packet, and it was because I knew that I needed to like get my weird little ideas out in whatever form that they would take, that meeting ended up being really great, where I was able to just tell him like the channel 101 things I was doing, or the sketches that I was writing, like things that weren't, they were just pure from my stupid brain, and it wasn't like I'm trying to impress like whatever the fucking Zachary Levi show was in 2000s Chuck. Like it wasn't me trying to like kiss the ass of whoever was interviewing me. So I was able, I think, to present myself in a more authentic way. And a miracle happened by the end of that meeting. He goes, "Okay, so I think you actually would be good for something that is like cooking." And that ended up being this sketch show that, Warner Brothers was doing, that some people from Robot Chicken were running. And so it was because I just like, told him all about my stupid ideas,
Mhm.
that ended up leading to that opportunity. But like I said, I was on that job for however long. I also, again, I was like full of hubris. I was like calling up Asians, being like, "I'm a year one staff writer on this show. Don't you want to represent me?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "Okay, you're lost." Well, it's like calling up people who were like guest speakers at Chapman. I was like, "Hey, I'm ready." And they're like, "Yeah, okay. Well, why don't you get at least another year? Like, what are you talking about?" But it was, yeah, it was a big learning curve. But yeah, I had that first job. And then after that, I had like a big gap because I didn't have an agent. And then after that, I went on to the Aquabats show. But then after that, I had a big gap too. And then I think the next job after that was going to Ellen because I needed to work.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I would say like what's applicable about that example, apart from the fact that it feels so ancient, the way that just saying staffing feels so ancient. But I think it's really just a matter of like writing what sparks for you, not writing with like a specific, like studio in mind or showrunner in mind or whatever. And I know a lot of other showrunner people that have conflicting views on this. But I
Mhm.
think anything that's like just purely, especially when you're starting out, like something that's just purely from your brain, your sensibility, whatever, putting that in your pocket, I think goes a really long way. And if you're somebody who wants to write comedy, I think having a combination of a pilot or a spec and a shorter script, because nobody likes to read anything beyond 5 pages anyway, I think that's really good to have in your arsenal. And then I also think, to be honest, like even though my Channel 101 shows were fucking shitty as hell, and if you don't know, Channel 101 is, the community that Dan Harmon and Rob Schraub started so many years ago, I can't even count. But it's where Yacht Rock came from, that web series, a lot of web series like IKEA Heights, one of my favorite. Randall Park came out of Channel 101. A lot of people did. All of the writers from Rick and Morty came out of Channel 101. Those, especially first two seasons, you're like, okay, so it's everybody's here except for the chicks, apparently. Weird. Okay, anyway, moving on. Yeah, so I think like having that, kicking around, having Channel 101 as a place for, like it wasn't just that I was writing things, I was creating them too. And I think that that goes a long way too. And I think it's especially easy now, of course, with technology, but like I think we're in a maker culture. So I think that's the applicable advice that I think is actually really evergreen. Just make something, and don't even make something for the sake of sending it to someone. Make something to figure out what you want to make.
Mm,
Like make something to figure out like how the voice of what you write and how your characters interact feel in the world that you are, trying to create yourself. And like that's my whole thing too. I like to just like jump onto a page and jump into the action and just like let the I don't know, I get getting it on its feet, to use a theater term, like just letting that sort of speak to what the project is, and then I have like a better idea of what I want to do going forward.
mm. Yeah, this is a nice segue. I wanted to ask you because writing is a creative act, and I think a common problem that plagues writers is how do you turn that on? How do you flip a switch and you're just working? It's not a you have to be inspired, or it's almost luck that sometimes that you're able to do the thing that you want to do. So, as a professional writer, it's your job to be creative. How do you create that environment for yourself, like your habits? Do you what what's your system to be able to do
Yeah,
this kind of regularly, like on demand?
yeah. So going back, so I'll first say, going back to that very first writing job, I don't think I could have asked for a better job because it was so fucking hard.
Mhm.
It was like dumb how hard it was. If you've ever heard any stories about how Robot Chicken was run, then it was like one for one for that, where it was a sketch show and every single writer was responsible for 10 different sketch pitches a day individually. We could use the room to bounce off, but unlike a lot of other TV writers' rooms where unless you're out to your own script and you're writing your own whatever, it's a communal effort and nobody is like scolded for or nobody is charged with being the singular like person putting everything together, so you couldn't hide behind anything. And within 2 weeks I was empty. I was like, I have no more ideas. And I remember turning to the head writer and telling him that I was like, I don't know what to do. And I'll never forget, he like looked around and was like, okay, so it's good you told me that. Don't say that to anybody else. This is what you're going to do. You're going to take a notebook. It has to be a notebook. Don't take your phone. Don't take your computer. Don't do any of that. Take a notebook. Take a pen. Go outside to the courtyard. Figure your shit out. And that's what you're going to do. And I like learned such a hard lesson that I've carried with me to everything beyond that. Because what that taught me was I grabbed that notebook. I got the pen. I sat out in that courtyard away from everybody, and I think I set a timer to like really push myself, which I still use, today. But I set a timer and just like wrote down every single idea, stream of consciousness, anything that could come. I was searching for anything. And I've heard a lot of like SNL writers, not to compare myself to them, but like, a lot of SNL writers, when they're up against the wall, do a similar thing. And by the end of it, I did have ideas, and then I just kept using that method over and over and over. So when I'm really like backed up, especially when I'm on a job, like one of my last jobs was like a sitcom situation. And so a lot of time, like the assignments from the showrunners would be like, pitch on this for jokes or pitch on premises and just like come up with as many different premises for episodes that you can. So I'll do that for that. My process now when I'm like trying to start a new project. So I'm in like a transition where I'm wrapping up one feature and then I'm about to start a new feature. And this new feature doesn't have a deadline yet, so it could be very easy for me to just kick it to the back. And so what I like to do is I have I'll set up accountability for myself. And this also comes with time of like knowing where I get lazy or knowing where I can get weak or whatever, knowing, when that imposter syndrome can kind of trickle in or whatever. So, I'll turn to my fellow writers that I feel like need this as well. And I have one friend in particular who is like a really, really great lifeline where I go, hey man, I'm writing this thing. Can you look at it really quick and just like, can we have a conversation about it? Okay, great. Or like, hey man, I'm writing this thing. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to send you this. And he'll be like, fuck yeah. And then I'll do that for him too. And so I think that those are the kind of friends too that you don't get on day one in this town, obviously. But like when you find them, you got to hold on to them, and we all need each other too. And that's another thing as well of like being a single writer and not a writing duo, like writing partner. It's just you. And so you have to like find those kind of like, barriers. So I'll do that. And like, for example, with this new feature, I literally sent a treatment of it to my friend the other day. And so I'm waiting for his notes. And while I'm waiting for those notes, what I like to do is I call it my harvesting stage, which sounds so Whole Foods. But it to me, or Johnny Appleseed, it makes me think of that. But it's the stage of the pre-writing where I know what the premise is. So I've just written the treatment for this movie, but the shape of the movie is not quite shown itself to me.
Mhm.
So right before we hopped on, tonally, I'm really inspired by Albert Brooks. I think that he's one of our greatest. And one of my favorite movies of all time, if I was asked by Letterboxd my top four, I would say Defending Your Life. So right before this call, I started watching Defending Your Life because I haven't made a full commitment, but the feature that I'm writing, I'm starting to think, is our main character, it's about an anxious person. Is our main character anxious in an Albert Brooks kind of way or anxious in a Larry David kind of way? Well, I don't know. So I'm like, my harvesting period is like watching movies or comps, whatever they may be, and trying to get that sort of sensibility. And so I'll write that and I'll still have a notebook and I'll just have something nearby. I don't really like Apple Notes because it can get really lost, but I'll have my notebook and I'll just like jot down like, oh, the opening scene could be a conversation about this.
Mm.
And then I'll just like write it down, but I won't commit and I'll just keep writing down little snippets, little snippets. And then from there, I will continue to shape it. I won't go into like the real, nuts and bolts of everything, but yeah, that's generally my process. And all of this is like, each step I'll do this and then I'll get into a beat sheet and then I'll get into an outline and then I'll get into a first draft and whatever. The goal is to do your story breaking so well and your outlining so thoroughly that, I feel like there's no reason why you can't write a feature in 10 days. So then I just get to that trash draft, part. And then from there, I take like, if I can, a month break from it,
Mm.
at least 2 weeks, because
Yeah.
then you're garbage. You get
Right.
draft fatigue. But yeah, so I was about to say, like every step of this, writing in any sort of creative expression is this psychological dance that you have to do with yourself. And I think that that's really what the muse is.
Mm.
The muse is always with us, I believe. I'm not saying that in like a religious, spiritual way. I just believe it. The muse is with us because the muse is us and it's our souls. And I think, I don't meditate, but, for people that do, I understand it's a way to sort of peel back noise and peel back the layers of, self editing or the layers of self judgment that can really obscure our view of like what is pure about our lived experience. And so for me, setting timers, doing baby steps into the process of writing a script, calling it my harvesting period,
Mhm.
watching movies and calling it writing,
Mhm.
taking walks and calling it writing. Those are all the little tricks I do so that I'm not freaking out and going, oh no, what if you screwed up? And I think also like coming from writing TV and then going into writing features a little bit more, which I'm currently doing, and then coming from film school, particularly film studies, Brent, where we put film literally on a pedestal. It was so scary to be like, how do I deserve? Like,
Yeah.
who the fuck am I? And then you're like, there's a bad movie made every second. You're like, you're right. But anyway, yeah, it's all these tricks so that I don't freak out. And then like one day I just wake up and I go, oh, wow, it's done. And then I think another thing that that I feel is helpful to my process is remembering, and this is, I did a seminar recently called How to Write a Script in a Week. And the way I introed it was, I'm going to probably butcher it, but like one of the first slides was like, here are the things I know to be true. Every single first draft of every amazing work of art was a piece of fucking shit. People will say that more eloquently, like, it's all starting with a marble slab before I'm like, no, it was all, there's something wrong. Even when a draft gets to be a production draft, there's something deeply wrong about it. Another thing I flew up was like, Greta Gerwig wrote the first draft of Lady Bird and it was 300 fucking pages. So like, think about that. And then I had another slide where I was like, every single first draft of every single Quentin Tarantino movie sucks fucking shit. And then I had like an insert of like how much it sucks. So I don't know. It's all these things that kind of are helpful to remind yourself that
Yeah.
like that Ira Glass quote, like I think you can get so intimidated when you're at like the bottom of the hill and you assume that all you need is to take 2 steps to Mount Everest. But like, fuck no, what are you talking about? Like it takes so much and it takes patience and it takes patience. That's an I have to say that again.
Yeah.
Takes patience.
Yeah.
No, the feature I just am hopefully wrapping this week has been over a year and so much. My manager the other day was like reminding me of old drafts, and I was like, don't remind me of old lovers. Like, I don't know her. I
Right.
don't know her. Like, fully was it like truly I couldn't remember. I was like, what are you talking about? That character was in there? Like,
Mm,
it gets to that point. And so, and then even in that point, you have to go, okay, don't judge yourself too hard. Like, give yourself grace.
yeah.
And I don't know, it's a process. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I have to say that I have personally taken your tutelage, your program called Trash Draft, and I know that the one of the best things about it for me is kind of the process you're talking about and the baby steps you're talking about and kind of setting yourself up with like sub tasks, before you get there. I think is really helpful for me because uh it is a mountain, right, to climb, and you're looking at it and you're like, okay, like where do I go, how do I do, but it's the I think tying this back into like a process, when you have like steps and stages that you can really actually achieve, like, okay, I just need to do this today, and
Yeah.
then I get to do this. And then so when you instead of just, okay, here's a blank page and I'm just gonna start writing and then hope to finish, that's like a, I don't know, a road to nowhere. But so process is having kind of these little touchstones and things along the way that can, one, get you to a better script once you finally get there because you've kind of worked it out
Yeah.
ahead. But it gives you those little baby steps of momentum to get you all the way there, because I I think without it, writers will just stumble in that pre-writing phase, even like before it
Yeah.
gets started. So yeah, I just like the just want to reiterate that process can be regimented. However, it works for different people, but to have some sort of plan that involves incremental.
Yeah. I think it's also important to give yourself grace when you don't follow the plan.
Mm.
Because like I don't always follow the same plan, soup to nuts, every single time. And in fact, Trash Draft came out of me going against the plan because I was like, I'm sick of waiting in an outline. I just want to write. And then I did, and it was revelatory. And in every writing teacher I've ever had, in college and post, I've expressed like, well, what if you just jump in and just start writing? And they're like, don't do that. You're going to fuck up. And for me, I understand what they're saying. They're saying like writers that jump into a draft too quickly can get too precious with what they generate in that draft. And then they get too like lost in what that, script is. And yeah, for me, I think doing trash draft is a way to like it kind of like you take the baby steps to guide yourself there. But then for me, trash draft is okay, but don't waste your time on the bottom of the hill being so scared at the top of it. why don't you jump to the top really quick and feel how it's not that scary? And
Yeah.
then when you step back down, you go, it's not that scary. I'm gonna
Hmm.
go back there later. But
Right.
right now, like, and then I think it helps sort of dismantle the things that can be hangups for a lot of writers. And I also know a lot of writers, and I was one of them for a really long time, where I would just like wander in outline for so long. Because you do that thing where you have a good idea and you tell all your friends and they reiterate how good of an idea that is. And then they give you that burst of energy, like telling you that validation, like, hey, it's a good idea. You go, great, I'm not going to write it. I'm scared because it's built up too much, or like, you get into this zone of like, what is the correct way to do it? And I know I've been rambling a lot, but I want to say one quick thing. And you know I
Yeah.
feel like this is something that like I heard recently that like kind of changed the way I look at that first draft and scripting in general. It is impossible to write a perfect first page without writing the end of it.
Mm.
And I think that that's another barrier that a lot of writers get lost in, where they get so intoxicated by that perfect first page, but you don't know how to do it until you end it.
Right.
And that's not even speaking, that's like all genres, right?
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, just those little things, like giving yourself grace and knowing that, like, even like Steven Soderbergh starts from zero and like has to figure out his shit and go, like, I don't know, like, I don't know what they're going to do this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody has like that kind of like garbage run with their new ideas.
Mhm.
And that's what I think is actually like a really beautiful part of this community that ends up being really equalizing. Like everyone starts from zero at some point.
Right. Yeah. Uh, I forget. Oh no, it was Spielberg. Some clip of him, some interview from I don't know, 93 or something. It's like 60 minutes. He's like, do you forgot what the question or the setup was, but he basically admitted every every day I walk on set and I have imposter syndrome. I'm like not unsure. There's that moment of like panic, but then it kind of I don't know, he settles in or whatever he does, but then he can operate. So even someone like that
I
who's
know.
is going through that, it's hard to imagine, and it might even be easily disregarded as them just being falsely modest or whatever. But it's true. Like no matter where you are at, every project is different. It requires different things. You might have been there before, but it's still that I don't know. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
that new fear all the time.
Yeah. I used to be so angry when I was like coming up and thinking to myself, like, damn, I wish that I was a mathematician where I just had the formula and I plugged in the formula every time and was like, I don't need to worry. I found the formula. But
Mhm.
instead, I chose a profession where writing a script is like assembling a puzzle fucking blindfolded. And
Mhm.
you're just like, oh, I can feel that there are pieces here, but I don't know how they fit. God damn it. And like, if you just finished a perfect script, you start from fucking zero and nobody keeps score in the way
Yeah.
that you want them to.
Right.
Sometimes they may do it, but even still, like that, with that comes pressure. So, but for the longest time, I was so frustrated by that. And then I kind of, with the help of therapy, have flipped my perspective on it. And that it's moments like that that actually remind us like we're alive and keep that like heartbeat of what excites us about the unknown of this process and the miracle, like the hat trick that we perform every time when we create something that we actually like that is its own miracle. And to like be open more to, for lack of a better word, the journey of like what creation can be versus like a rote, lazy derivative process. And that's the thing that we need to pay attention to the most
Yeah.
versus like, I wish it was easy. And which makes me think of like that League of Their Own quote, like if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Hmm.
But I think honestly, like if it was easy, you'd be bored is really more of the saying.
Right. Right. Then it's a job. Then it's
Yeah.
like it's just like clocking in, and which is the antithesis of the creative mind, I guess.
Hmm.
Okay, real quick, I want to go back a little bit to what you were talking about earlier. about kind of using other people in your process. I think that's really important for writers, especially because you're alone, you're in your head, you're at your
Yeah.
desk, you're for hours and hours and days. And how many cycles do you go through? This is great. I love this. And oh no, this is terrible. Like, and you're just riding this wave alone. And something, again, going back to the experience I've had in your workshops is the astounding amount of energy and positivity, kind of creativity, like that comes with sharing your work, getting feedback, getting other people's perspectives, but then being able to reciprocate, and it levels the playing field. You don't feel like you're just getting judged or whatever.
Yeah.
It's an exchange in the best way. So yeah, I guess you've already spoken to it, but
How do you find that?
yeah, what do you look for in a person? Maybe you're. I guess everyone's different, but what do you look for specifically?
Yeah. I think it's like it's leaning into your dog sense when you meet somebody, right? And you start to have creative conversations with them. There's certain people like, over the weekend I just saw a bunch of writer friends that I love dearly. I would never send anything to them because I know they're competitive, they're comedian, like there's a certain hang up. And maybe it's less in those situations that I'm worried they'll judge me and give me shitty notes, but really more like it won't be a warm environment where the goal is to make this script better. It'll just be triggering in a way that you don't want it to. So, that's one example. When I meet people where I feel like, yeah, my dog sense is telling me they're safe. They're not like they have the same goal. It's not going to be, if we get together to share notes, it's not going to be a round of posturing, and that we're both kind of coming at it, very like wholesomely and, like wanting to give that feedback that is actually going to be instructive. I think that in your body when that's going to be the case. And it really is, it's that maxim of like networking across the aisle, or networking across, not up, where the people that are going to lift you are the people that are in the boat with you currently.
Mhm.
And so, I know a lot of people that have met those kind of people in like sketch classes or other classes at UCB, etc., or just like mixers. I ended up in a writers group that sparked just because I happened to stumble into a WGA mixer once and met one person who met me with other people, blah, blah, blah. So, that can happen like spontaneously too. But I think it's just knowing in your body that you trust them, knowing that you trust that they will take care with your work, and that you also trust their brain for understanding to have a shorthand with it. My friend that I mentioned earlier, he started in the industry as a development exec and then switched over to being a writer. And, that's a really hard transition. But because of that, I think, I trust them a little bit more with giving me feedback from that development exec perspective. And I always go to them for like pitches. And I go like, how do I pitch this? And like, what does this look like for this? So that's always great. And I also like feel like they're a really great like idea generator person. Okay, great. I go to them for that. I have other friends who are just strictly stand up and they're really great at just like bouncing jokes. And I
Mm.
go, okay, cool. So like I know, they're gonna be really great if I have one friend in particular who I'm truly all day, every day when I'm writing a script, just sending screenshots and going, is there a better punch for this? And then they give me a bunch.
Mm.
And then I reciprocate, like it's just like it's about figuring that out. And I don't think that there's like any sort of like clear formula of like how to gather those people. But like if you are watching or listening to this, you know what it feels like to stand with your group of friends, and everything is going to be comedy coded for me, but like stand with your group of friends and like riff around and be like, oh, we're playing and we're speaking the same language. Or in other creative expressions, like what it's like to like talk to somebody about your favorite show and have a really intelligent conversation about the storytelling. That's a tell that that person, whether they're a writer or not, is going to be a safe space for sharing your work. I have non-writer friends that I share my work with, and they'll give me feedback, and sometimes I like it better than like other writers because other writers get too forest through the trees, they get too mechanical about it. And then I'm also, I should just say, like really, really lucky that, I'm married to somebody who I trust their brain so much. And it really helps that, they work in the industry, but they're not a writer themselves. So they're not like mired in all the bullshit that I've like been through. They kind of see it from a different perspective, and they're also like a really, they appreciate things in ways I feel like I'm too jaded to. They're always laughing the hardest genuinely at every comedy, and I'm the one being like, how do they do that joke anyway? But yeah, I think that it's just like, maybe it's helpful to just like listen to the way you feel, like being very aware of how you feel around your friends, and maybe just going through your phone, and like whoever sparks to you when you're like, cruising past their name in your contacts, you go, oh, you know what, I bet they would be open to whatever. And if you have any creative people in your life, no matter what they do, I guarantee you, especially right now, people are down for a hang where you get to talk about anything besides what's happening in the world, and keep it low stakes. I still need to schedule this, but at the beginning of the year I reached out to a bunch of friends and said, do you want to just have like a one-off creative night, just like
Mm.
a one-off, like no commitment. We, some of you guys have kids, like no commitment for like once a month or whatever. Like, let's just pick a night and like get together and have a charcuterie and like a salon and like talk about our things. And everybody loved that idea, So I think that that's also a great gateway into forming those people in your life.
That's great. That's so great. All right, Julia, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
This was an amazing conversation. We'll have your contact information, or your whatever, your socials and such, attached. Anything you want to promote, like Trash Draft, if you're still doing.
Yeah, I'm always doing it. And in
All
fact,
right.
I'm just about to announce, I think, three.
Okay. Well, yeah. Anybody watching should definitely sign up because it is fantastic.
Thank you. Well, you were great at it
Thank
every
you.
time.
Thank you. Well, yeah, thank you again, Julia, for your time. Have a great night. Wish you all the
Thanks,
best.
you too.
Welcome to the Second Look family here, and we'll take care. We'll be in touch.
Okay, great.
Bye.
Bye.